and welcome to the inaugural webinar in our Moving Forward series. I am JJ McMurtry, Dean of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies at York University. Thank you so much to all the people who helped organize this event and to put together this new and exciting series. A special welcome to our guest, Cait O'Donovan, Vice President, Digital Commerce at Cineplex. And thank you also to our host, Associate Dean Sean Kheraj. You'll be hearing more from them shortly. I'd like now to acknowledge the fact that many of us, wherever we are, in Toronto, across Canada, or around the world, are on the traditional territories of different Indigenous peoples. Although we aren't in the same location, we recognize many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been taken care of by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. So welcome again to our guests and to everybody joining us on Zoom to the inaugural Moving Forward webinar series. I just wanted to very briefly describe the purpose of this series. We created it to address the theme of moving forward from three different perspectives, and especially important as we're dealing with COVID to try and create spaces for us all to interact. First, we want to talk about how organizations are moving forward through the COVID-19 pandemic and other crises. This will be the focus of today's interview with a key leader in the highly disrupted film industry. Second, we will address how society and our organizations are moving forward on equity and justice. This aspect of moving forward will be the topic of our next webinar on October 13th in our Women in Leadership panel. Thirdly, we will provide information and advice to our students as they move forward towards their career goals during this disrupted period. Panels of alumni and other experts will give students and graduates career-related advice in upcoming webinars featuring alumni from the Departments of History and of Economics. If at any time you need help with this experience or have questions about the content, feel free to click on the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Our team is here and ready to help you. So thank you again, and that's enough from me. I'd like to hand it over to Associate Dean Sean Kheraj now, who will introduce our guest. Thank you so much, Sean.
Okay, thanks, JJ. I'm going to introduce the first interview here for this series, and we're going to be speaking with Cait O'Donovan, who's the Vice President for Digital Commerce at Cineplex. So I'll ask Cait to turn on her camera and join us. Hi, Cait.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today.
Maybe we can just start with a quick overview of what your role is at Cineplex, just to set some context for the audience.
Absolutely. So I'm the Vice President of Digital Commerce. I oversee the transactional part of the business, so Cineplex Store, which is, obviously in this time of COVID, a really exciting place to be working with a great team.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you about was the, now 6 months ago, the transition to the shutdown at the start of the pandemic. How did this affect your work and the business processes that you're responsible for? And how did your teams respond at the start of the shutdown?
Yeah, so it was a very exciting time, I think, for many of us that have been working in the digital space, and especially at Cineplex, where, so the store and this transactional part of the business has been around for about 5 years now. So it's been a priority for Cineplex to make sure that, look, we can entertain Canadians with movies wherever they are. It's been, in some ways, a startup, right? It's a startup within a much more mature organization. Obviously, the theatrical business is a big one. And it's been growing leaps and bounds year over year. And then we hit March, right? And we hit that March, Friday the 13th, where really, BC had gone a little earlier, Ontario happened around there. And in the 4 weeks that followed, really the next 4 to 5 months, even until now, a kind of an astronomical growth that it was really astounding to see. And you know, in some ways, we quadrupled in size in the 4 weeks afterwards, and all of the amazing opportunity that comes with that, also the challenges. And it's the challenges of how do you serve a Canadian base that is desperate now to be entertained and wants the content and wants to kind of have, you know, hang out with their family at home, at a scale that, again, we had only dreamed of kind of reaching down the road. So it was a really foundational time. And as you hit on earlier, how we worked needed to shift because of that. And look, some things that we learned early on in that process has changed, I think, fundamentally how will work going forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's astounding to hear, like 4 times growth in such a rapid period of time. So with that transition, what do you think the skills were that you needed to draw upon as a leader to kind of facilitate that kind of sudden change?
Yes, so the skills that for myself, but also for all of us, right? Because the team-based and really a team-based approach. And I think, you know, in some ways we've been lucky because, you know, Cineplex early on, like we were on teams, so the foundations were there to really work together and be together online. But a lot of those skills that, again, would come up in any team-based environment. So collaboration, listening, teamwork, but also ruthless prioritization and articulating ROI, right? So because, again, when you're being really that fire hose of challenges and opportunity and what do we do, and really being able to, as a team, identify where the wins are, what are the kind of trade-offs you have to make to get there, and being able to move really quickly. So listening, trust, communication, I think are some of those core skills that are critical in those disrupted times.
I'm so curious about this. I sort of add a question, but how quickly did you start to notice that ramp up of demand? Was this like right out the gate, or were you anticipating that?
By the hour. So, you know, you're looking at these, right? So, and really it, I think, you know, looking back for many of us and just speaking personally, is that I think we all knew that something important was happening, right? Kind of into February, early March. I think, you know, even watching different regions start to lock down, I don't think, I mean, personally, I don't think I'd really anticipated what lockdown would be like, right? And so what we saw was, you know, you look at the data on like what happened that Thursday, Friday, Saturday afterwards, and you're like, it just kept going, you know, bigger and bigger. And again, because Cineplex is a very integrated organization, what it meant was kind of when theaters had to close down, and obviously the communication with guests and the marketing and team really focusing on how do we just explain what's happening and what our approach is, that effort really focused then on the online business. So we really, in some ways, unlocked the full engine of you know, marketing. We work obviously with Scene, and so it was, again, a really exciting time to rethink and reapproach going to market and marketing and acquisition and retention, and how do we use our data better to get the right message to the right people at the right time. And I think so it was a combination of just consumer behavior, like people were home and they wanted, really, I mean, it was March, you couldn't really go for these like patio visits. So that kind of demand, but on the other side, I think really stepping up how we talk to Canadians about what we could offer. And frankly, a lot of people still don't know that Cineplex offers movies at home you can buy and rent. And if you're part of the Scene program, you can use your points for that. Like, it's even easier. So it was a great—
You can even get your popcorn.
And exactly. So like, again, we've been a partner with Uber Eats and Skip the Dishes for a while now. And same with the Rec Room, right? So the Rec Room, I don't know if everyone knows, but Rec Room and Palladium are also part of the Cineplex family of brands, and also on Uber Eats Skip the Dishes. And so again, this pivot to, okay, people still want popcorn. So how do we get them popcorn? How do we get them your nachos? And you would not believe, people really do love their nachos and their popcorn and their fountain drinks at home. So again, just this shift of a model to, we're here to entertain you, we got you, and knitting those pieces together. So again, really exciting times.
So obviously your processes as a business and among your coworkers had to change pretty quickly, but I imagine your relationships with studios, customers, and the other stakeholders that you work with also changed. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the key thing that shifted, and you know, those on the online might have already seen it or heard about it, but you know, this kind of this distributed work model, right? And so like there's a 5 levels, and really going from a level 1, which is like on site, to level 2, which is you know, online, but really you're modeling the on-site online, and then trying to get more to an asynchronous beat. So I feel like we basically within a week jumped from level 1 to level 2. So we just ported all of our kind of in-person meetings, set one-on-ones, you know, maybe catch up with studios, to an online forum. But the really exciting part was actually we went more. I mean, it's not perfect. We're not kind of, I would say like level 3, we're not there at all yet. But it was exciting to see, both with our partners like studios as well as amongst on the team, moving more to an asynchronous real-time work model. So for example, texts, right? And texting with whether it's Disney or Warner or so forth, because again, the pace of it was so fast. So, and if it was, you know, midnight here, it's only 9 p.m. there. And so just this flow of communication, which I think early on, or pre kind of pandemic, just the notion of like, what do you mean people are going to text you and reach out to you 24/7? It actually decreased the stress in that time, right? It just made real-time access to information, the flow of information, a little bit better. And so obviously it's abated a bit in the last time. That urgency of those first 2 months is where we're hitting more of a normal pace. But I think that notion of real-time, asynchronous, that this kind of formalized, we will all be in the same place between these set hours is kind of breaking apart a little bit, which I think ultimately is really exciting and important.
So we know that theaters have reopened, but they look different than what theater was like before the pandemic. So I'm wondering what you kind of see as the possible futures for cinema and theater, and how do you plan for this kind of business environment that you're in now?
So, you know, and there's a lot online on the Cineplex site and so forth, but what's in some ways, you know, interesting about what we were able to do is there were a lot of, you know, plans in place before, and what COVID really did was help accelerate some of those. So, you know, this push to mobile only or kiosk only ticket purchase, contactless entry, reserved seating. So again, these are things that we had been planning, but really accelerating them and making sure that from a customer experience standpoint, and also what guests want, is delivered, with the obvious, you know, and really important ones around enhanced safety, you know, no shared spaces, and all of those things that I think, you know, we're kind of taking as the norm now. So, but from a technology perspective and that guest journey perspective, I think a real acceleration on the technology side, and which again, important for how we move forward on that. And the second piece though that you're hitting on is, what does that then mean for getting together to watch things together? And you know, we have obviously with staggered seating, distance seating, also staggered start times, and making sure that the end times align. There's demand. People want to be together, right? They do. We want to watch things together, and also that experience on the big screen can't be replicated. And you know, I went and saw Tenet recently, and it's one of those movies that you're like, again, is the person who is running the online business, who believes so firmly in, you know, online distribution. There's some, you know, you see the scale of it. And so I think on one hand is, you know, really, I think a two-pronged approach. One is, how do we build trust and maintain trust with our customers and our guests, and make sure that we are ensuring the safest possible experience in those spaces, while at the same time really innovating and pushing, what does a virtual shared experience look like? What does a watch together or a shared thing look like? And there's a lot of really exciting things happening in that space that I think will, again, offer people more options for many people actually that even can't come to the theater, even when it was normal. I'm thinking of, you know, family with small children, people that maybe don't have a movie theater in their community. So there are, there's other ways of getting together, but in a more virtual way as well, which we're keen to push ahead on.
So I could keep asking questions, but we've got 87 people who are joining us for this session right now. And we've got a question and answer tool, which everyone should be able to see at the bottom of their screen. So if you want to pose a question to Cait, I'll be able to see them here in the question and answer box and then relay them over. And as we let people start to think about some questions that they might want to ask, I wanted to ask you about your connection as a liberal arts graduate. You have a background in communication and culture. So for maybe some of our audience here who are taking programs in liberal arts and are maybe thinking about working in a corporate environment like you when they graduate, can you tell us a little bit about your transition from liberal arts education to working in a corporate environment at a company like Cineplex?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I did my master's in the ComCult program. My focus was very much actually on video games and kind of the communication and the cultural shifts that were happening at that time. And this was really kind of 2009, 2010, when a lot of those massively multiplayer games were really booming. They still are today, obviously. And, you know, one thing I really appreciated about kind of the things I learned and really that time and space set aside within the master's program and really the liberal arts education there was around critical thinking and communication and in the brass tacks approach of critical thinking of, you know, it could be how we look at data, it could be how we assess, you know, what's happening here, what's working, what's not, and then obviously communication. So how do we speak to and ensure that what we say, how we say it, is really resonating and ultimately getting our points across. And so I think on one hand, the theoretical framing and the background coupled with a very succinct kind of training and approach in terms of how to deliver that. And so specifically, I was doing, because of my work in the ComCult program, in that liberal arts program, was around video games. And I started doing consulting work because, again, it was able to really look at this swath of what's happening in the gaming industry, what's really happening in the media and entertainment sector from that lens and start framing it up for businesses. So I was working and doing consulting work for a number of broadcasters and groups in Canada, and that led to a job offer to actually come and run one of their gaming groups, because they were like, and I was like, I don't know how to make games yet. I can do apps, I can do websites, but I don't know how to run these things. And they were like, we actually don't care about that because we have engineers that can run it, but we need somebody that can help us think through the business approach, right? And it's not like how to run a P&L specifically, it's like, where's the win here? And what's happening in the culture space and what's happening in gaming space? And I think for everybody that's in really that liberal arts group right now is you're very much in that nexus point of a shift, right? It's a shift in culture, it's political economy, it's how, frankly, our entire economic system is shifting, and having ways to think through that and provide insights and identify opportunity. That's what business wants right now. That's what we all want. Is like, yeah, we know there's so much data, there's so many articles, there's so many things, but really, how do you think through and assess where the wins might be?
I think that's really helpful for any students who's in a liberal arts program, thinking about how do you actually mobilize your skills when you get into the workforce after graduating, and what is the value of those skills? Yeah. We are getting questions here, so I'm going to pass some along here to you, Cait. So Christopher Park asks, looking back, can you tell us anything that you might have done differently at the outset of the pandemic in terms of that rapid transition to a new kind of work environment?
Such a good question. Yeah, hindsight 2020. I think we overcorrected on meetings. So we went from this, there were just so, I talk about the fire hose. There were so many decisions that had to be made because you had these, really the content pipeline had opened up. We were being flooded with content. We had guests coming left, right, and center. We had technology kind of questions we were trying to solve and juggle. And I think in those first couple of weeks, I think we overcorrected on meeting. And part of that is a reaction to roles and responsibilities, clarity, but also how do we share information and how do we put together. So I think in hindsight, two things I would have done differently is I think would have figured out a different way to just, in some ways it's almost like a Twitter, an internal Twitter feed that's like, here's just what you need to know. And so it doesn't matter what level in the organization you are, it doesn't matter who you are in the group, that you could get kind of the same information, and that you didn't worry about, oh, if I don't show up to that meeting at 9:45 to noon, I'm going to miss that update. And so I think like a better way of broadcasting out and sharing critical information is key. And the second is shifting, way too many meetings, way too many. I think my team would agree with me on that one. But, and again, we're still getting there, right? It's a transition. And I think the sustainability of how do you keep a working team and a group engaged and morale up when we're about to enter wave 2. So, or we are in wave 2, you can say. So again, I think that's learnings we're taking into this next round of the fight.
Okay, I've got a question from Stephanie Hill here, and I'll try to summarize this. She's asking a question about public communication. So how does the coronavirus emergency as a sort of exercise in communicating to your customers differ from other controversies that you might encounter in the theater issue, like the screening of a movie like Unplanned? Are there lessons that you can draw from previous experiences to the context of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think that's a really important question. And I'm going to disclose, I don't think I'm the right person actually to answer it, right? Because my area is the kind of the online digital space, obviously working close with the theatrical team, but I think it's a really critical question, and I don't want to do a disservice by just kind of giving an answer that's not really framed up well. So, we have a really, Cineplex sells and engages Canadians. And so we take that relationship very, very seriously. And so we have a team on the communication side and marketing side that really thinks through a lot of our, and in some ways, like consistent message communication, right? So what's happening? Why are we doing it? Trying to make sure we're hitting every channel. But though that's specific on, what would we have done differently? I'm sorry, I'm not the right person to answer that question.
That's okay. I've got a couple that might be right in your wheelhouse here.
Okay.
Two people have asked questions in this general area, but what is your sort of outlook for streaming film? So we've seen during the pandemic the sort of emergence of direct-to-consumer streaming for premieres. Is this something you're seeing continuing? Is the disruption of the pandemic ongoing? And what's the life of streaming movies going forward?
Yeah, this is an area I could talk about. This is a whole other thing. I'm happy to come back and do like a 9-hour chat roundtable on this one. So it's phenomenal. So yes, the shift that we've seen in consumer behavior around streaming, but also the kind of monetization trends from maybe advertising to streaming, hybrid models, more common in the States, obviously, than in Canada, and the pay per or the transaction model. So again, there's a lot that was happening pre-pandemic in the space of content and monetization and customer behavior. Definitely been a rapid acceleration of the streaming services and just subscription, right? We've seen subscription numbers for those, when disclosed, go a lot higher. Now, as everybody knows, or maybe not, but subscription is a hard game because you have to keep people engaged, right? You have to keep your churn numbers down, and that's on content, because with these services, it's so easy to join for a month leave, and I'm going to join to watch The Mandalorian, and then I'm going to quit my service, right? So again, because of that, we have seen a shift in content. Not with all providers. I think given the direct-to-consumer play where we're currently sitting, and I'm talking about like HBO Max or Paramount Plus, which aren't in Canada in any real way yet, and who knows really what's going to happen there. I think the long-term push to streaming is a very real trend. The thing that, and again, why I think it's actually not disheartening, and I think it's to be expected, is when you look at what's happening with the Netflix numbers, what Crave has been doing, is there's a shift both from the pay TV side as well as from the rental services. So really, the reason why, let's say many of these studios are shifting their content to their own providers is that they were tired of giving this money, all of this kind of customer data, frankly, in that direct one-to-one relationship with the customer to somebody else, and they had no relationship with them. And frankly, from a monetization perspective, they thought we can do it a lot better ourselves. So when you look at the theatrical window, and even really on the transactional space which is like the EST and that kind of premium rental window, PVOD, which again, if those on the call have really read up on what Universal and AMC were talking through in July, is look, we've been a big proponent of PVOD and a big supporter of PVOD for years, but it's, the studio models take time to work through, and so again, acceleration as the theme of pandemic, of we're now in a time where PVOD is rolling out, and so we have launched PVOD on the store basically right as pandemic landed. So these are movies that are premiering for the first time, and we're now in a space where we're looking at, and we're working through with all the different studios, with a number of them, kind of what does it mean going forward? So is it a day and date? Where is it going to be a day and date model? Day and date meaning it opens on a Thursday in the theater and you can rent it online at home same day. Is there going to be a window? So like this minimum 17 days that AMC and Universal are talking about, maybe that goes to 30. Again, there is such customer demand for it, and from my perspective at least, I think it's a huge untapped market. I don't believe that it's just only cannibalization. I think what we saw on the shifts of entertainment hours when Facebook and Instagram really got into the video game was that people will spend more time engaging with video, not less, if we do it in a way that lets them easily access it, right, and easily consume it and find it. So I'm really excited about PVOD, obviously early days. Cineplex is like one of the few organizations in the world that actually has that full customer journey from the theatrical launch to the home entertainment space. So again, is a kind of a data-driven company sitting on 10 years of customer data. Like it's like the biggest playground you could imagine to really look at driving those things. Anyway, sorry, I could keep talking, but
this is really interesting, and there's a bunch more interesting questions, so I'm going to try to get to as many as I can here. Trying to decide where to pick from here. Okay, I'm gonna take a question that's kind of about the workplace. So this is a question from Alexander, who asks, how have you been dealing with a fully virtual workplace? I just graduated, but have been running a distribution company for the last few years. For me, it's been a hard transition to keep up the morale of my employees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important point. And I think, how do you be a good manager, a good colleague, a good teammate in a virtual workplace during really stressful, high demand times is something I think we think about a lot, but I think that really, like, how do you do it better is something that, again, I don't have an answer on that one. It's something I think about a lot, and I continue to try. Look, the things on morale is always, communication, transparency. In a time of uncertainty, the more that you can even just share and be open around what you know and what you don't know, and making sure those communication channels with one's team and colleagues is open, I think is important. And I also think, look, what happened in June with the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a lot of really important discussions that are coming up that aren't just about, let's say, purely about COVID and safely returning to work or virtual. There's also these massive shifts happening that as a team and as a culture, like as a group, we have to talk through, and we have to say, like, what does this mean for us, and how do we live this, and how are we going to work differently and better together on that too? So like, how do you have those conversations in a time when you can't just turn your chair around and be like, hey, let's go for a walk. So yeah, I think it's continuing, especially as we head into winter in Canada. Anything we can do to stay in touch with each other, again, this may sound derivative, but like just kindness, like just trying to, and again, this is somebody who struggles, I think, with being way too blunt sometimes, just trying to acknowledge that there's a lot of people working in ways and under situations that are really challenging for a whole bunch of different reasons, many of which we might not even know of, right? So I think just trying to focus on the long term, be there for each other, and trying to facilitate some kind of open dialogue is at this time, at least, how I'm looking at it. Open to suggestions as always. Email me.
Okay, I've got one that shifts us back into the industry a little bit. Kind of question here from Zach about the early experience of the reopening of the theaters. Wondering if there's any discussion about the current matrix of multiplexes across the country and what that might look like in response to how the audience turnout has been in the initial reopening of theaters.
Yeah, so I think Cineplex was the first theatrical company to open circuit-wide. And listening to those conversations with the theatrical team is they really thought through and took their time to really make sure that it was being done in a safe way for staff, for guests, all of those protocols. So I think, a lot of it is a TBD, if and when a vaccine is available, if and when we can, as a country and different regions get a handle on the kind of huge growth rates that we're seeing at the moment, then we'll see, right? Again, we think we've been really good at managing it on a very safe, slow scale way, and we'll continue to do that. So as the different regions kind of respond in different ways to their the local level of issues.
Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing that we are at 12:30. So I want to thank Cait for joining us and sharing her experience with this transition and what Cineplex is looking forward to as we proceed with these uncertain times, and thank everybody who's come and join us here this afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Cait.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.